4 a.m., the faint morning light is coming through the curtains. In my hazy state of consciousness, I noticed my husband, Brian, getting up from bed and leaving the room. I could faintly hear the sound of a newspaper delivery person riding their bike somewhere far away. In the gaps between those sounds, I heard my husband, Brian, quietly going upstairs. What, Brian? Why is he going upstairs? Upstairs, there's only the room where Brian and I store our clothes and our high school-aged granddaughter Emma's room. At that moment, I was still half asleep, and I thought, oh, Brian must be getting up to use the bathroom like he usually does at night. So I didn't think much of it and fell back asleep. The next moment I regained consciousness, my alarm clock by the bed was ringing loudly. It was a usual morning, a typical Sunday. Today, I had a day off from work, so I started doing household chores in the morning. Brian came out of the bedroom, changed into his running clothes, and began doing some light stretches at the corner of the living room. Hey, weren't you up pretty early? Huh? Oh, yeah, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. After that, didn't you go to Emma's room? It was around 4 a.m., right? He didn't look at my face. After finishing his waist stretches, he quickly left the house. Emma came down from the second floor as he was leaving. Her bangs had grown down to her eyes, hiding them, but the dark circles under her eyes were noticeable. Good morning. Hey, did Brian come to your room this morning? Huh? Yeah, I'm sorry. Why is she apologizing? Emma sat down on a chair, hunched over, staring at the empty table. She seemed tired. Sensing the atmosphere that I shouldn't talk to her, I silently handed her a cup of tea. Then I went to the bathroom and started checking the laundry in the basket for the day, piece by piece. My routine. If there's a tissue left in a pocket, it would be a disaster. But the moment I picked up Emma's pajamas, I froze. What is this? My name is Sophia. I live with my husband, Brian, and our granddaughter, Emma, who is the child of our deceased son and his wife. Brian and I are both tutors, and we met at work. Brian used to tell me how he struggled with his studies when we first met. He passionately talked about how he didn't want his students to repeat his mistakes, so he dedicated himself to teaching them. I don't care if I'm disliked. The strong spirit that comes from strict guidance will surely help them in society. He often shouted at students. He would make them stay after school until they solved their problems. If they forgot to submit their homework, he would scold them loudly. In my younger days, I thought he was a wonderful person who cared deeply about his students. But that was 14 years ago. A parent of one of his students filed a complaint about his teaching methods. The principal called him into his office and told him that his teaching was excessive. In the end, Brian was forced to quit his job without being able to defend himself. He tried to find another job, but no place recognized his talents. At that time, Brian was 54 years old. He didn't have the courage to try a different type of job. Eventually, Brian stopped looking for a job and stayed at home. I couldn't blame him, I just wanted to support him. It was very painful to see him sitting on the sofa with a very dark expression, just staring at the wall. But we need to earn a living to survive. As Brian started to sink into depression, I decided to start working as a tutor again to support our household. On the other hand, what saved him from his gloom was the presence of our granddaughter, Emma. 10 years ago, our son and his wife died in an unfortunate accident. Emma, who was only 4 years old at the time, couldn't understand that her parents were gone and cried almost every night. I didn't know what words to say, so I chose to spend sleepless nights with her. On quiet nights, the two of us would look at a butterfly encyclopedia. Emma loved the butterfly encyclopedia and would stare at it desperately while her tears fell onto its pages. A memory that never leaves my mind. There are so many different butterflies. They're beautiful, aren't they? At that time, I couldn't think of any other way to distract Emma from her sadness and pain than to look at the butterfly encyclopedia together. After taking in the left behind Emma, perhaps due to the emotional scars of losing her parents, she often couldn't attend school. You don't have to go to school if you don't want to. I'll teach you everything you need to know. Brian probably said it lightly at first. From elementary school to middle school, whenever Emma couldn't go to school, Brian would teach her. Emma was a quiet, reserved girl. She was obedient and straightforward. The simultaneous death of our son and his wife was truly a tragic event. However, I believe Emma has become a new purpose in life for Brian. When I would come home from work at night, the living room was always empty. If I approached Emma's room upstairs quietly, I would hear Brian's voice giving steady guidance in a low tone. All right, this problem here, it's an application of this equation. I couldn't see Brian's face through the door, but from the tone of his voice, I could tell he was lively. I started preparing dinner. The kitchen was always clean, thanks to Brian, who cleaned the entire house. I took out the frying pan and started cooking. As the enticing aroma of food filled the room, Brian would come down with Emma. He always had a motivated expression, which reassured me deeply. Sophia, listen. Emma has a great memory and understanding. She could definitely become a scholar in the future. That's amazing, Emma. You're doing so well. Emma, with her slightly long bangs covering her eyes, would lower her head a bit shyly. I believed that these happy days would continue forever. When Emma reached the 10th grade, the atmosphere in our house gradually changed. If you can't even solve a problem like this, you'll definitely fail the entrance exams. I could hear the loud shouting from Brian even downstairs in the living room. Brian was tutoring Emma in her room. Although Emma, now a high school student, was still quiet and introverted, she was attending school regularly. She attended a well-known local high school and her grades were good, so both Brian and I had high hopes for her future. No! That's not it! Look at the problem more carefully. Feeling a bit worried, I went upstairs and knocked on Emma's room door. It was Brian, not Emma, who opened the door and said, "What is it? What's wrong?" I hesitantly entered the room. When the door opened, I saw Emma's hunched figure close to her notebook. Her back seemed to be radiating exhaustion. How about taking a break? So I suggested. Brian, after a moment of hesitation, told Emma to take a break, and we all went down to the living room. I had prepared Emma's favorite cake in the living room. The coffee was already made, and as soon as Brian sat down, he started drinking it. He let out a sigh that seemed a bit exaggerated. 10th grade, this is a crucial time, Emma. When you're young, you can push your body a bit. If you study hard now and get into a top university, you'll have a bright future ahead of you. I quietly sipped my coffee. A bright future, huh? I didn't think Brian was wrong. But when I thought about the feelings behind his passionate words, it made me a bit sad. Brian didn't graduate from college. I knew he felt insecure about that. Even when he was a tutor, he always said he had the lowest academic background among the teachers. He didn't want our precious granddaughter Emma to experience the same humiliation. That feeling was something only I understood. His guidance was strict. Even though I wasn't directly involved, I knew it. With the exams coming up, I didn't think to stop him. The most important time to study is now. So let's give it your all, Emma. Emma just looked down and didn't react at all. She didn't even touch the cake she usually loved, clenching her hands under the table. I noticed her biting her lip. Emma, what's wrong? Nothing. Emma said in a slightly hoarse voice. Emma had always been introverted and had a hard time expressing her feelings. After eating half of the cake, she said she'd save the rest for later and put it in the fridge. She poured herself a cup of tea and started heading back to her room upstairs when Brian stopped her. Make sure to solve up to problem 20 in the workbook. I'll come check in an hour. Emma didn't respond verbally, but nodded slightly to show she understood. She seemed a bit down. Emma had always loved studying since she was little. She used to proudly show off her perfect test scores with a big smile to Brian and me. Maybe she's just tired, I thought, and considered taking her shopping for a change of pace when we had some free time. One night, I woke up when Brian, who was sleeping next to me, got up and quietly opened the door to go out into the hallway. It was 4 a.m., and faint morning light was filtering through the curtains. In my groggy state, I caught a glimpse of Brian's face, which looked eerie. Maybe it was just my imagination. But for some reason, I felt uneasy and forced myself to get up and listen. I heard the sound of the toilet flushing, and I lay back down. So he just went to the bathroom, huh? I could faintly hear the sound of a paper delivery person's motorcycle in the distance. Amidst those sounds, I heard Brian quietly going upstairs. Wait. Brian, why are you going upstairs? Upstairs, there were only the room where we kept our clothes and Emma's room. What could he be doing so early in the morning? As I pondered this with my eyes closed, the next thing I knew, my alarm clock was ringing by my pillow. Instinctively, I reached out to stop the sound. I gently placed the clock back in its place and looked at Brian, who was breathing peacefully next to me. I got up and started preparing breakfast. It was a usual morning, a usual Sunday. Today, I didn't have work and was doing chores from the morning. Brian had a habit of going for a walk in the morning. Brian, who had come out of the bedroom, changed into his running clothes and started stretching at the edge of the living room. I placed the newspaper I had picked up from the mailbox on the table and casually asked Brian, "Hey, weren't you up quite early?" "Huh? Oh. I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom." "Then, you went to Emma's room after that, didn't you?" "It was around 4 a.m., right?" Brian is doing his back stretches without looking at me. "I was just helping her with her studies." Helping with studies? At 4 a.m.? I found it odd, but Brian finished his stretches and quickly left the house. As he left, Emma came down from upstairs. Her bangs covered her eyes, but I could see dark circles under them. "Hey, you've been studying since early morning? Are you feeling all right?" "Yeah, sorry." I'm not blaming her, so why is she apologizing? Emma sat down, slouched, staring at the empty table. She looked exhausted. She must have been studying all night and finally took a break. I thought she might not want to be disturbed, so I silently placed a cup of tea in front of her. I then headed to the bathroom and started sorting the laundry, checking each piece one by one. It's an old habit of mine. My late son used to leave tissues in his pockets, and it often ruined the laundry. No one does that anymore, but habits die hard. When I picked up Emma's pajamas, I stopped. "What is this?" There was a faint red stain, like blood, on the sleeve of the polka-dotted pajamas. Turning it inside out, I found more blood on the back. I pondered for a moment before throwing the clothes into the washing machine. We have a balcony on the second floor for drying clothes, but thinking it would be hard to climb the stairs as we get older, we added a wooden deck last year. Now, I can step out of the living room and hang the laundry easily. And the deck's edge is perfect for sitting, where Emma is now seated. Despite the summer heat, Emma quietly sits there, sweating on her neck, gazing at the garden. The garden is a bit wet. Emma must have watered it to cool things down. Emma, it's hot out here. Why don't you come inside? No. I'm waiting. Waiting? For what? The droplets on the neatly mowed lawn shimmer in the light. Emma doesn't answer my question, and I finish hanging the laundry before sitting next to her, looking at the garden. Emma. I saw blood on your pajamas. What happened? I asked casually. I thought maybe it was just a nosebleed or something. But Emma's expression immediately changed. She looked at me in shock and fear, then hugged herself and started trembling. What? What's wrong? What happened? Seeing her sudden change, I quickly touched her shoulder. Emma grimaced and shook my hand off. Don't touch me! I was just confused. After a moment, Emma silently rolled up her t-shirt sleeve. Wait, is that? Her shoulder was bruised, turning purple. Showing me that painful bruise, she began to cry. I immediately hugged her and stroked her head. We stayed like that for a while, without seeing each other's faces, until Emma, in a raspy voice, began to talk about how Brian had been coming to her room every morning for the past month. It wasn't just one morning, it was every morning. Brian would bring problem sets he created and wouldn't let her go out until she solved them, scolding her if she didn't. When I was at work, he would force her to study harshly and hit her arms and back if she got answers wrong. I'm the one at fault. I'm sorry. I have to finish the workbook before Grandpa gets home. Emma pulled away from my arm and stood up from the wooden deck, heading back to the room, so I grabbed her arm to stop her. She looked down at me with a frightened expression. I knew Brian was passionate about education. I also knew his teaching style was always intense, pushing the other person to their limits. But I didn't realize he was using physical punishment. I never imagined he would force his own granddaughter to study so harshly that it would leave bruises on her body. Holding Emma's arm, I started to cry. You must have been so scared, so hurt. The thought of what Emma must have been feeling while sitting at that study desk always brought tears to my eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I held Emma's hand tightly and apologized to her. The melody of the wall clock announcing the time rang out from the living room. I lifted my face, quickly wiped away my tears, stood up, and holding Emma's hand, I returned to the living room. I took out the case with insurance cards and other items from the bag and closet, looked Emma in the eye, and spoke clearly. Emma, let's go. Where to? I don't know, but Brian will be back soon. Let's leave before he gets home. Emma looked down and wrung her hands in front of her stomach. She seemed confused, not knowing what to do. She might have been so scared of Brian's physical punishment that she felt too afraid to escape, too scared even to try. I forced a bright expression and smiled at Emma as best I could. It's okay. I'll protect you no matter what. And so, Emma and I decided to leave the house with only the bare essentials. We took a taxi from the house to the station and transferred trains several times to head to a distant town. We headed to my sister and her husband's house, with Emma still looking down with an anxious expression. I had called ahead and briefly explained the situation before we left. When my sister and her husband learned of the situation, they, usually so calm, showed a different expression and guided Emma to a separate room to calm her down. As soon as Emma was out of sight, my sister and let her anger show and muttered, clenching her fists, that she could never forgive this. And I was deeply grateful that she readily agreed to let us stay as long as we needed. My smartphone rang, and when I looked at the screen, I saw Brian's name. I hesitated a little but decided to answer the call. Sophia! Where did you go? Emma's with you, right? She hasn't even finished the workbook. Where are you taking her? Brian, do you realize what you've done? I could hear Brian sigh on the other end of the phone, even though I couldn't see his face. He began to insult Emma, calling her stupid and sneering, asking if she had told me he was violent. Guessing we had run to my sister and her husband's place. Did she say I was violent? Emma said that? Yes. Enough to leave bruises on her shoulders and back. Brian, do you realize what you've done? The one who doesn't understand is you, Sophia. We don't have any children. She is the only one we can rely on in our old age. I was at a loss for words, unable to grasp what Brian was saying. His argument is as follows. The reason he was violent towards Emma was to get her into a prestigious university and secure a job at a top company. And once she had a stable income, she would take care of them in their old age. He fervently argued that this pain was necessary for her to not only excel academically but also to become mentally strong. I was speechless at his words, which seemed insane. You hurt Emma for that reason? Brian, this is pointless over the phone. I'm coming over there. I'm taking her back. With an audible, excited breathing, the call ended. I dropped my shoulders and put my smartphone back in my bag. No matter which mode of transportation I used from my home to my sister and brother-in-law's house, it would take 2 hours. Even if Brian hurried, I felt there was still plenty of time. If you decide to break up, I'll support you. Yeah. I'm going to check on Emma. When Emma was a child, she sometimes stayed at this house during Christmas. There is a guest room, and Emma, without needing to be told, would always choose that room. Turning the corner down the hallway and opening the door, there was a faint smell of damp paper unique to books. Inside, there was a large bookshelf lined with old books. On the lower shelves, next to the complete series that every household had, were various encyclopedias. Emma had fallen asleep by the window, leaning against it with a thick butterfly encyclopedia open. She must have been really tired. For now, I'll let her sleep peacefully. Without saying anything to Emma, I returned to the living room, where and prompted a discussion about what to do next. I can't forgive him. Hurting Emma, for any reason, it's absolutely unforgivable. No matter what Brian says about remorse or regret, I can't bring myself to forgive him. My sister and her husband listened to me with serious expressions. Maybe it included some daily complaints. Starting with my dissatisfaction with Brian, who had been unemployed for over 10 years. His extreme educational policies, and my own inability to stop him. I confessed everything in front of my sister and her husband as if I were repenting. After a while, the doorbell rang. And answered it, and Brian, apologizing, handed over a box of cookies. Brian's expression darkened when he noticed me. Come home, Sophia, he said quickly. I'm going to stay here for a while, and I'm divorcing Brian. What? Is it because I was strict with Emma? He used the gentle expression strict because my sister and her husband were present. In response, I didn't correct him strongly. But I could never bring myself to forgive him, and I felt such hatred towards Brian that I didn't even want to see his face. He stood silently in the doorway. Looking at his palms, he eventually gave a bitter smile. Emma doesn't have parents. We are her parents. Not making a child study is a parent's sin. If Emma's grades are bad, there's no one else to blame. What are you saying? I don't understand at all. Everything was for Emma. I know Emma hates me. But, Sophia, will you reject me too? Will I be alone again, like back then? Yes, 14 years ago, he was fired from his tutoring job because just one parent of a student complained. He was depressed and in pain. Emma was the one who saved him from that darkness. Maybe Emma was desperately trying to shine a light on Brian's heart. I looked up and tried to walk towards Brian. At that moment, and grabbed my arm. Her expression was severe and suspicious. "That's enough. We're not talking about being disliked or anything like that. We're focusing on the violence that left bruises. And the others have nothing to do with this, right? This is a family matter, isn't it? You just used Emma for your own desires. No matter what the reason, it doesn't justify hurting Emma. That is. If you keep being so persistent, we'll have to deal with it not as family, but as a duty. So be careful." He couldn't say anything back and fell silent. And her husband are actually both police officers. I don't want Brian to get into trouble with the police by filing a complaint or anything like that. And Brian seemed to be handling things calmly, but they must be really furious inside. As for me, I had already made up my mind to get a divorce. Brian was very reluctant about the divorce, but my sister and her husband persuaded him. My sister's words, suggesting that it would be better for him to agree quietly to the divorce, in exchange for not making Emma's matter public, seemed to have been the deciding factor. Brian reluctantly agreed, divided the assets, and moved out of the house. After that, Brian lived off his pension in an old apartment. I don't know how he envisions his own old age, but I felt a little sad thinking it might end in loneliness. After the divorce, Emma and I chose to return to our old house and live just the two of us. When I reassured Emma that she didn't have to worry about studying for exams, she looked genuinely relieved. However, possibly due to the emotional trauma, she hasn't been sleeping well at night. For now, she is going to counseling, and we'll take our time figuring out what to do next. Whether it's going to college later or getting a job, it's okay. If she doesn't want to do anything, that's fine too. Emma is still young, and it's okay for her to keep searching until she finds an answer. This year, another hot summer has arrived. Emma sat quietly on a cushion placed on the sun-heated wooden deck, looking out at the garden. I watered the various plants surrounding our house with a hose. "It's hot, isn't it? Why don't you come inside?" "It's okay. I'm waiting here." I was about to reflexively ask waiting for what, when Emma stood up, her eyes wide open. She quickly put on the sandals nearby and walked toward the garden, looking at the sky. Her heels were sticking out of the worn-out sandals. When did she grow up so much? In Emma's line of sight, 2 black butterflies were fluttering around and then resting on the grass, drinking water. Every summer, the swallowtail butterflies come to drink water. They occasionally come from the forest near our home. As Emma approached the butterflies, they circled around her a few times, and then landed on the ground again to drink the water droplets. "Hey, Grandma." "What?" "Please, live a long life." I gently embraced her as she stood there. Her frail body made me think I need to feed her more delicious food. Someday, I will leave this house before she does. In such a future, what can I do now to make sure Emma is as little sad as possible? The butterfly book left open on the wooden deck fluttered its pages in the wind. Eventually, the 2 swallowtail butterflies slowly flapped their wings and flew over the fence. Watching the butterflies. "It's okay. I'll take care of everything," I whispered softly.